Hey everybody, it's Chris Coyer here. I have a presentation here, maybe a little bit of a grandiose title called A Tale of Four Properties. I only say, it's not really a tale. We're just gonna talk about four properties, four CSS properties that are all related to the idea of shapes in CSS. Geometric shapes is what I'm talking about here. So this is a presentation I put together for a couple conferences, and I gave those presentations. Then I thought, hey, why don't I just do it from my office too and record it and put it on YouTube so everybody can see it. Maybe you're watching this video on CSS Tricks, I'd say, perhaps. I also am a co-founder of CodePen, kind of a web coding playground, social network, dev environment kind of thing for front-end developers. And then every week, for the most part, I have a show with my friend Dave Rupert called Shop Talk Show. So that's just me. Let's just say, hypothetical, let's kick this tale off, as it were. Let's just say that you really like the band They Might Be Giants. They're a great band. Nerds tend to like them. They have music that you think about, and it's fun and stuff. Perhaps you really, really like, I'd call their seminal album, their 1990 album, Flood. Maybe even had it on cassette, Definitely one of the only records I had that had its own, kind of hype track, kind of intro track to get you psyched for the record. Like this.
Why are we marching hand in hand? Why are the ocean levels rising up? It's a brand new record for 1990. They Might Be Giants' brand new album, Flood.
Nice. Little foreshadowing with that ball movement there, a little bit. Maybe if you don't recognize that track, why would you? Probably didn't. That was just the intro track. It had some hits on it, though, at least popular songs. This is a popular one from the record. Pretty fun one. Oh, that's a good kick drum.
Looking at you in the alley by the light switch, who watches over you?
Ooh. Yeah, anyway. Oh, I like that. Birdhouse in Your Soul. That was a good one. I'd say if you're that big of a fan, you only really have one choice here. We're talking fan site time. I think it's our job, our duty, when we really love something, to make a fan site. What goes on a fan site? I don't know. Lyrics and photos. I don't know what goes on there. Let's start with lyrics, though. That makes sense. I put together this loose outline for how I think we should approach the site. Maybe, some navigation, get a little wacky with it. Hit counter for sure. Oh, okay. So we're going to focus on some lyrics for now. Particle Man, great song from that record,
Particle Man, doing the things a particle can.
Yeah, Particle Man, great song from it. Let's get some HTML for us to work with here. We're gonna, this is a fan site, a fan website. We're gonna make a website. You click on lyrics, you click on Particle Man, you get to a song like this. I'm pretty sure this is how HTML works. I probably grabbed these lyrics from somebody else's fan site. Put them in paragraph tags. Rock and roll. We want to do something special though. We can't just dump out the text on the page. That's no fun. We got to do each song here. I feel like should have some sparkle to it. Something kind of cool. Maybe for inspiration for Particle Man, we'll look to Triangle Man. I don't know if the official ratings were in, but Particle Man, they would fight. There's multiple characters in the song, and they kind of go at it. Triangle Man tended to win. I find in the song.
Triangle Man, Triangle Man. Triangle Man hates Particle Man. They have a fight. Triangle wins. Triangle Man.
He wins. He wins that time. He wins again later in the song. Plus, triangles are a great shape, and that makes a great excuse for this talk. So, what can we do with the triangle one? I got an idea. Let's make those lyrics on the page, but we'll slant them up, you won't just read the article or the lyrics straight up and down. They'll have a slant to them, kind of an homage to Triangle Man in a way, like this, like slanty, like not just straight up and down, slant. How do we do that? Here's a way that you can do that in web design. I think that's got the right indie spirit here, Just use a pre-tag, have that white space be respected, make an angle. But I think there's maybe even a better way than that, having to format your HTML in a particular way. What we're going to look at is floats. Brand new thing in HTML and CSS, kind of important stuff, allows you to wrap text around rectangles and stuff. I'm just kidding. Floats aren't new, but here there is a property called shape outside that allows us to kind of fiddle with that shape that the text flows around. Those gray lines being text and the blue being the element that's floated around. As you can see, that here's what's going on. Float left, it's got a width and a height, and the text just flows around that. It's automatically kind of a display block element kind of thing. This is the property that we're actually going to be talking about. Property number 1 in our mission here, shape outside, that can kind of recontrols how that text is going to float around that floated element. And floating being important. It does have to be floated for now. Maybe it won't forever with exclusions and stuff like that. But for now, you got to float the element. So shape outside, that's the property. The value being this function, and it takes one called polygon, which I think is fascinating. Polygon. I can just define a polygon in CSS. Indeed, you can in this context. So I'm going to give it 3 values. And in fact, it can kind of take infinite values. I would think 3 being kind of the minimum there, 3 being the minimum for a triangle, especially. Now you see what I've done, X, Y. So 100 pixels to the right from the upper left gets me that point. 200 gets me down there. 0, 200 gets me there. And now I've defined the shape outside as this polygon. Look what happens to the text. That's what's going to happen. That's how the text is going to flow around this shape now. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool stuff. It's kind of like chipping away at a floated element. And then as I wrote that, I was like, it's really more about redefining that element, I'd say, in that triangle could have been bigger, than the shape outside. It doesn't really matter. You're just defining a new shape for the stuff to go around there. So we could define a triangle that's kind of like 100% high. I know we use pixels there, but we could use percentages as well. Really takes any of the values, relative values, whatever. We'll make a giant triangle, homage to Triangle Man, and we'll set the text around that floated element, and we just got the look that we're looking at for. As a bonus here, you can animate that. CSS, it's just numbers, in this case, it's just pixel values or percentage values, whatever. CSS tends to be kind of cool, allowing us to animate things that are just numbers like that. So here's an example where I set up an animation for the shape outside property here. So, oh my God, you can do that. So it's animating from kind of like nothing to that thing. That's just kind of fun. It's cool to know that you can do that kind of thing. This is how it works. In CSS, we'll put a transition on that shape outside property and then have an off and on class, essentially. One of them is a polygon it basically does nothing because it's 0% wide, but it's setting us up with a polygon that has the same number of points as the one below it. That's important. CSS needs that to be able to animate between those two states. So if I have an off and an on, it's off by default. I plug the on class on there and it will animate that polygon between those two things. So I just have an off and on class there to help me kind of think through the animation. Here's just like a draggable example too, to kind of get you thinking about this, that this class this element's being dragged around and the shape outside is being moved at the same time. And, just to get you thinking about possibilities here. Let's do Universe Man. Universe Man appeared in the song Particle Man. Lovely. He's a big dude, man. And in fact, Tiny Toons once animated the song Particle Man. It's a great video. You should definitely YouTube and watch it. He was this big. He has this big ass belly. I think he should take that big ass belly and plop it up against our text. I think that would be great. So like what kind of a circle certainly, kind of epitomizes Universe Man.
Universe Man, size of the entire universe, man, usually kind to smaller, man.
He's big. He's a big circle. Still on shape outside here. We looked at polygon. Shape outside can take circle or ellipse as functions as well. So let's just use ellipse. Ellipse is just kind of like a more powerful version of circle, which allows you to say how wide and how tall is that ellipse going to be, and then at what position. So let's take Universe Man. Let's assume there's an off and an on class for Universe Man as well, too. And now I've defined this ellipse as a 200 by 200, so it's basically a circle, but I've moved it to negative 300 pixels up. So it's kind of nowhere, like it will have no effect, and then it will move down. And if we animate between them, well, you'll see. This is how it works. We have this big floated thing. We've kind of collapsed it to nothing because we've made this circle, and the circle is negative 300, so it's just kind of gone. And then we have the on class to move it down into the text, and that's the animation. And as that happens, the text will move away from the inside. And it's actually, the animation's even cooler than that. So if here's the demo again, Triangle Man, and then if I click on Universe Man, it's gonna transition off Triangle Man first, and then there's Universe Man. Yes. Oh, how awesome is that? So notice we had to transition off Triangle Man first and then transition on Universe Man. And that's just, it's because of that weird CSS thing that I mentioned, and that CSS can only animate a polygon to a polygon for sure. It can't transition a polygon to an ellipse. It's not going to happen. Even within polygons, it has to have the same number of points. So that's why I have these off and on classes, and this is some JavaScript that just does basically class name manipulation. But if you want to transition to a new one from Triangle Man to Universe Man, you'd transition off Universe Man, then put the off class for Universe Man on there. So the polygon's gone and it's ellipse now, and then drop the, kind of wait, make sure everything's done, then drop the on class and it will animate to each other. So it's just some class name manipulation to get done what we needed to get done. This isn't vital. It's just I wanted to be able to basically animate from a polygon to an ellipse, and this is what I had to do it. So just some class name manipulation there, nothing to worry about. Of course, we're just screwing around with this dumb little fan site, but there's actually tasteful things you could do with Shape Outside, certainly. This is Stacy Kvernmo, who's a gymnast, and that's her right there, wrapping some text around her own body that she's kind of clipped away with a polygon, which is pretty cool. I like it. There's a lot of stuff going on in that demo, but definitely Shape Outside was at work there. Jen Simmons has been talking about doing interesting things with layout for years now. Back in 2016, she made a bunch of demos specifically for Shape Outside, like this tomato. It's a circle, right? Egg, ellipse, certainly. I think there's some grapes here. That's actually going to be a polygon. We'll look at that in a minute. Note that you can cut right through the text if you want to. It works with things like column layout as well. And we often think of float left. All these demos we've been looking at, the object is on the left and we float the text. The text flows around it on the right of the element. But in this case, all of these individual plums are float right is the shape, and there's a bunch of them, and they all kind of flow around the text, and you can just mess with it. Think about that a little bit. There's also this, you can give to Shape Outside instead of polygon, circle, ellipse, and there's even others that we'll look at. You can pass it a URL, and the URL to a raster graphic, or it might take SVG, right? Some kind of graphic, and it kind of does edge detection and figures out what's going on here. So the swan on the right, that wasn't a polygon there. That's just being passed an image, and it's, figuring out through thresholds what's going on there, how to stay away from the swan, which is a pretty interesting thing. You can't give it a URL to existing SVG path on the page, for example, which you might assume that you could, like why can't I link to an SVG path? We'll look at and question some of that stuff shortly. What about Person Man? Person Man's up in the song Particle Man. Maybe this is Person Man, just a normal person. I just grabbed this person off the Noun project or something. How would I do that? Well, let's look in a minute. First, let's look at this browser support stuff for Shape Outside. So this is just assuming that Shape Outside is supported in the browser. I'm looking at the nuanced connection between Shape Outside and the values that it can take. So Shape Outside can take the value polygon, it can take circle, it can take ellipse. We looked at that. It can take inset, which we'll get to in a minute. It will not take a path, like we just looked at the shoulder of Person Man there, which we'll look at again in a second. It can't take path, which seems crazy because paths are great. We'll look at that. Believe me, we're going to get there. And it takes URLs, but you can't link to an existing SVG elements path or circle or anything like that. You can link to raster graphics there. So you got to know what's going on, but it will take that. So Person Man, again, vector data. Let's say we want to do that with Person Man. I mean, certainly we could fake it with a polygon, but let's hold off on that. And again, this browser support chart is assuming that Shape Outside is supported in the browser, which you get pretty good coverage there. I'd say it's, it's worth using. A lot of this stuff is pretty progressive and has been friendly anyway. No Internet Explorer Edge stuff yet, and no Opera Mini, which is probably good. I don't think Opera Mini is in the territory of doing this kind of thing. So, probably, remember in the Grapes and in Stacy's demo, it's probably like faking a path, faking those curves with just straight lines through Polygon. That's what we could do here. Certainly it would be no big deal. We could absolutely do that. But let's just, as fancy people say, let's put a pin in that just for a second, because we need to deal with Particle Man himself. Duh! This whole thing's about Particle Man. We got to do something with Particle Man. Clearly, he's a tiny little speck, flying around the screen. We got to have him flying around this page. And it's pretty important to me that Particle Man flies around in this particular path that I've drawn. Smooth, fluid curves. This is the pin that we stop for a minute. A polygon is not going to work with this. We can't do that. We can't just fake it. A polygon, he'd be herky-jerky around the screen. We need this little speck to be flying around very smoothly. Fortunately, that's no problem. There's another property. We're moving on to property number 2 here. Offset path actually used to be called motion path, which makes a lot more sense, I think.
Why they changed it, I can't say. People just liked it better that way.
I don't think they liked it better that way in this particular case. I think motion path makes sense. Offset path, I think they changed it because they're like, you could apply a path to an element and never animate it if you wanted to, which seems bizarre to me. It's kind of like, we can't call it margin. People might not use margin to actually space out elements. They just apply it to different elements because they hate each other. No, I don't know. I just think motion path is better, but whatever. I get it. Offset path. Maybe you use it to position things. I don't know, and not animate it. It really seems animation friendly. 99% of the usages of this for sure is going to be animation, I would say. So motion path, just like Shape Outside, it takes a value of a function, essentially. Path with the parenthesis there is a function value, just like circle and ellipse and all that other stuff. Path. Text, Shape Outside did not take path. That was the big X in that browser support. Motion path does take path, and that's wonderful because paths are awesome. They can draw anything. They can draw circles and ellipses and polygons and all that stuff, but they can also crucially draw curves. It's a very powerful syntax for drawing anything, which is fantastic. It's kind of like the ultimate drawing tool. It comes from SVG. It's the ultimate drawing tool in SVG. All of the other elements that draw things basically get converted to paths internally anyway. This is what the path syntax kind of looks like in SVG land. There's a D, like for data attribute, and it has its own little syntax in there. You see M, move to coordinate 25, 100. Sure. C is a type of curve. There's a bunch of different types of curves they're all, everything's like letters and then a series of numbers. C takes 3 coordinates, which are Bezier points in a final destination. S is another type of curve that takes less data because it makes some assumptions and stuff. You don't need to know all this. I'm just saying that paths can draw anything, including these nice curves, including how we want Particle Man to fly around the page. So I would take something like this, and I literally drew this online in a Method Draw, which is just like free vector editing software on the web. Pretty cool that stuff is available. You can see definitely that it's vector data. I can save right out of Method Draw and get an SVG file. You can see that is indeed represented by a path in SVG. So this is a graphic. I could use this graphic directly and it would show that path in the web browser or however I want to use it. But we're not intending to draw that path. We want to just use that path for Particle Man, the element, to fly all around. So let's say we made Particle Man. He's 5 by 5 pixels with a background of blue. So you can see this little dot, this little 5 by 5 dot. Then I say offset path and then grab that SVG data and put it in that path function and then use the keyframe animation, which defaults to 0 motion offset. Offset path and motion offset go hand in hand together here. And then over 3 seconds, traverse this entire path. That's what this looks like. Here's a CodePen demo for that. You can see the little 5 by 5 speck flying around. If I make this a lot slower, perhaps you can see it a little easier. I hope this is coming across okay in the video. If I make it much larger, you can see this giant thing going around. Notice how it is following the, like, it rotates itself as well to make more sense. Say that was a car. It would look really weird if that car wasn't rotating along this path. If it was just static, that would look pretty weird. So here's this car cruising along the path. I turned it into a car just through a background graphic there. But that I hope that really drives home what offset path is for. It's for animating movement along a path, which takes path data, which can draw anything. So it can be as curvy or boxy or anything as you want. Notice that that offset rotation. So here's an example that uses a path to fly a modal window in, kind of fun style, on a cool path. You know, why not? There's blurring and twisting. If I don't reset that or force the offset rotation to be 0, you see the modal dialog box looks really bizarre. So here I'm forcing it to 0 so it stays upright, which makes more sense for text, you know, to stay upright as it's flying in. So here we go. Our fan site is moving along. We decided to go with lots of lyrics for the site. You know, we got Particle Man. We put some buttons in there so that we can click on to which man we want to see right now. Do we want it slanted? Do we want Big Universe Man shoving his belly up against the text or whatever? Now, Particle Man, we could wire up that thing to a thing that we can click, and Particle Man kind of flies onto the screen and then flies away. Why not? That's kind of a fun thing we could do. Gives people a reason to visit our sweet fan site, for one thing. Here's the deal, though. In CSS land, this offset path, you know, I said, oh, it takes path. Paths are amazing. It takes path data. Now we have paths in CSS is amazing. Okay, great. But offset path only takes path, which is a little WTF-y, really, because it's like, what if I want to animate something in a circle? Like, why can't I just give it circle? Yeah, a little bit makes sense because you define a circle, like which way along the circle. You'd have to have another property or you'd have to just have it only be able to animate one way around the circle. Well, clockwise, I guess. But paths kind of inherently draw. There's 2 ways to draw the same circle and path. Go one way or go the other way, and it's kind of inherent to path. So that kind of makes sense. And anyway, look at the chart a little bit. I think we're going to the chart. Yeah, here we go. So a shape outside takes polygon. Great. Offset path doesn't. Same story with circle, same story with ellipse, same story with inset. Offset path doesn't take any of these things that shape outside path, but it's exactly flip-flopped for path. Shape outside doesn't take path, even though it would be awesome if it did. And offset path only takes path. And then it doesn't take a URL at all. You know, shape outside took a raster graphic, offset path doesn't. It's another bummer thing because you could imagine there being a drawn SVG shape on the page, and you'd want to animate something along that drawn path. You might want to link to, you know, the URL to a fragment identifier of that piece of SVG. You can't do that too bad. Okay, so we looked at the cheesy, you know, like make Particle Man fly around. There's actually tasteful things you can do with it as well. Here's a nice little loader by Rachel McGrain with these little balls flying around in a circle. Very cool. Hopefully that comes across as smooth. It's actually quite smooth in case it's not smooth in the video. Works pretty good. I'm not sure how hardware animated it is, but maybe it depends. There's probably trickery here. I like this one that it's a thank you button where this heart like shoots out other hearts. But you can see in the JavaScript on the left there that the path, the offset path, literally it's being set with JavaScript, but it's, you know, it's setting CSS data there for it to animate, is random numbers, just generated random numbers so that the path that those hearts fly around are different every time. This is a fun one. Dan Wilson has done a bunch of writing about motion path and offset path and all of this stuff. He made this one a bit of a game. So there's some chunks that are all being animated along the same motion path, which is neat. And it's not really obvious what that path is. You can't really see it in your head until this animation gets faster, and then it kind of reveals itself. Hopefully that comes across in the video. The real demo, it's very clear what that image is. This was a little weird to me, but it's Texas. If that wasn't obvious in the video, I think if you go to this URL and actually look at the demo, it's very clearly the shape of Texas. Idea time. We're going to need to push forward on our fan site a little bit here. We're going with the lyrics theme. I like the lyrics theme. You know, it's just fun, kind of. And what else can we do, though? We have buttons you can press. How about some hovers? You know, how about you hover over something and something surprising there that you didn't expect to be there? Let's use another one of my favorite songs from the record, Your Racist Friend. So that was pretty fun.
I know politics for you, but I feel like a hypocrite talking to you and your racist friend.
it's a pretty good song. You should listen to that. Here's the lyrics for Your Racist Friend. It's a sad story about somebody who doesn't really want to be at the party because he's locked into a conversation he doesn't want to be having with a friend who's racist. So here's you, and here's your racist friend. Well, how do we do that? What does ClipPath take? It takes the same kind of functions that Shape Outside was looking at. So with ClipPath, here's another one, Inset. That's the one that we didn't look at, but we were looking at world. But the rest of that image isn't hidden by the left of the browser. That's hidden by the clipping path that we've created. And we just set it on hover because we can. You don't have to use it on hover. It could be anything, but it makes for kind of a fun thing. So there's actually tasteful things, of course, you could do with ClipPath instead of what we just did there. There's this is a fake website for a gym that I put together for another demo, which has these rectangular vertical chunks here, which really are just divs. These are just big divs that I've done some media query testing to make sure that there is a mouse present, so that because there's information we're locking behind a hover effect here, which is probably not a good idea, and not a lot of affordances that would explain that you're supposed to hover over these things. That just seems bizarre. But it's just a kind of a fun demo of what you can do with ClipPath, from animating from clipped to not clipped. These are just stacked, absolutely positioned divs sitting on top of each other animating. So you can see there's ways to do that. I've done it a little bit good and a little bit not good, whatever. A lot of rectangles on the web. I'm sure you realize that of all the different display types we have, everything tends to be a rectangle on the web. It's sometimes fun to mess with that a little bit. And these are just essentially, they are started lives as, divs or sections or whatever they are, articles perhaps, because it has a title and some text, which, we've set a background color of black, we've set the title yellow, whatever, but it's going to make a rectangle. We've used some column layout, whatever. As long as we have some padding around that text, I can go ahead and clip it away a little bit. In this case, I'm just clipping a few percentages off some random corners, essentially, to make slightly non-rectangular elements. Super easy, progressive enhancement, friendly thing to do with ClipPath there. Of course, it's animated ClipPath, so we already looked at that a little bit, but these just a couple of shimmy, shake things there. Social media lately has told us that all user avatars must be round. Twitter went to round. I think Facebook's going round. All social everything is round these days. So, of course, if I was just making an avatar round with an image, I'd probably go with border radius. That could probably get done the first two there. But that one on the right that turns your avatar into a little speech bubble thing, that's the kind of thing that's perfect for ClipPath combined with Polygon, because those are straight lines there, right? Perfect. It's animatable with kind of a bouncy cubic Bezier easing here as well. Woo. Sure, why not? Triangles going on there. Combine that with a little bit of JavaScript that says the center of this clipping path with a circle should follow the mouse position around here. Fun demo by Noel. Pretty great. Here's another great demo of just some images that are divs really that are stacked on top of each other that reveal themselves as you click through with clip paths. Like which one is active? Well, clip away all the ones below it, which is pretty neat demo for that. One of the best tools that exists out there for ClipPath, but this would also work for Shape Outside as well, because it's mostly just giving you the syntax of these functions, is this tool called Clippy by Bennett Feely. Google Clippy, get past all the dumb Microsoft stuff about their little helper tool thing from 100 years ago, and find Clippy, this tool, and it's great. So you can, click a triangle here. I can move over to the left and move these sliders to, that's a circle. This is ellipse. The most useful one is all the rest of those ones on the right are essentially polygons. And it's great. And you can see the code on the bottom there of all the different points and what their percentage values are. Percentages are probably the most useful values, although we covered, it can take rems, ems, pixels, VWs, whatever. But yeah, so this tool is great. And then you grab that code and just use it how you want to use it. I find myself starting with this 90% of the time when working with these functions. It's such a great tool. So guess what? With ClipPath, ClipPath, you'd think it could take path, but it can't. If we look at these browser support charts a little bit, Shape Outside and ClipPath hang out together here. It can take polygon. Remember, Offset Path couldn't take any of this stuff. clip path and shape outside are similar, and then it can take polygon, circle, ellipse, inset all the way through. Neither of them can take path, which is too bad, despite clip path, the name path, and the fact that path as a function definitely exists in CSS. For some reason, it can't take it here. And remember how shape outside took a raster graphic or whatever, a graphic of some kind. And clip path can take a URL, but it points to an SVG on the page. Like if you have some inline SVG sitting there that defines a circle or a path or whatever, you can give a URL, an ID identifier to that existing clip path, and it will use it in the clip path. So that's what we really wanted for both offset path, and it'd be nice for shape outside, frankly. It does work in clip path, but none of the other ones. So it just gets a little dicey at how things are supported a little bit. Those being the really kind of sad ones, I think. I'll make a list at the end of this video for browser vendor stuff. So there are ways to get curved clipping path. Like if you have a div or an image or something on the page and you need to clip it with curves, which is path is the only way to do that, or with not non-circular or ellipsy curves. So you can do it with clip path where you point to the URL, hashtag clip path on the right there points to some existing SVG where that path is defined, or you can use mask instead, and mask could point to an SVG file with curves or raster as well. Masks are, where there's black gets shown through, where it's white it gets covered, or vice versa. I can't remember. So here's how masking works. It's this mask image property in CSS. So Illustrator, I have the heart. I've uploaded the heart. I was just showing you that, look, it's at that URL that's being used there. And you can see the black is where it's being shown through, and the white is where it's being hidden in this case. And I'm controlling the mask with the mask size property here. It even takes keywords like cover, which will make it as big as the element itself. And it's vector, so it scales nicely. So that's mask. If you need to clip something with a curve, you can. You just got to do it like this. Tim Holman made this demo of slides in which that it uses mask image and scales the size of that mask to make like a slideshow framework. That could just be any HTML in the middle there. I just put some bogus content in it. So you can see the star. He used a donkey here, so it's kind of like an ass wipe. Hey-oh, and here's a mustache. And that you can see the curves in that mustache, proving that you can indeed clip things with curves in SVG, which is cool. So speaking of SVG, there's this very important book that's been written about SVG that literally all of you should have 5 or 6 copies of laying around, I think. Go ahead and Google Practical SVG and pick up that book if you want to learn more about SVG for sure. You could say that SVG is kind of like the graphics format that says bad mother sucker on it. It's amazing. It can do way more than like we're talking about shapes in CSS, which is kind of baby stuff. Like what you can, if you're really into shapes and bringing shapes to the web, SVG is really the graphics format for that. Not so much with shape outside because you can't really wrap text in SVG. But if you're interested in all that clipping and masking and how that stuff is way more powerful in SVG. It's nice that and convenient that we have it in CSS, but if you can leave it in SVG, you might as well, because can be multiple elements. It can be just much more robust in SVG. SVG also had animate motion as part of Smile, and it, of course, was more robust than what we have with offset path, certainly too. Smile is pretty robust, but it's very not well supported, and the Blink team has threatened a while back to rip out Smile. It's just not something that you should invest much of your time and thinking in. But I'm kind of thinking SVG's gotten a lot more popular in the last couple of years for sure. And the proposed kind of deprecation of Smile entirely, I think, is kind of why this stuff is starting to show up in CSS all of a sudden. Animating motion and having the ability to do these clippy stuff and also control SVG from CSS. I think it's all that has a lot to do with it. So here's something that you should just know about that you can do regarding CSS and SVG combined. So I have the Noun project here. I'm just grabbing one of their icons and dragging it into CodePen. That's the thing you can do. It draws a little flag. Here's me grabbing that first path and just making sure that I have control here, like I think I do. So I'm grabbing the flag pole there by selecting the first path, changing it to fill red. Great. Do you know you could do this? D, D is the data attribute in the HTML. If I pass this nothing, it's going to disappear because I can control that D attribute from CSS. So let me copy and paste the values in there. Now it's back. I can change this M value, which is moving the X coordinate of that first pole there, and it totally moved it. I have control over this data from CSS, which is very interesting. So I've made that flagpole taller. And now I'm saying only do that when I hover over the SVG. So I have that control as well. It's drawn itself by default, and then I'm taking over control of the design of it on hover, which is neat. So if I say also have a transition, watch this. Now I have movement in that shape as well, just how you'd expect it to work in CSS, really, which is neat. I can mess with this a little bit. Just make sure that flagpole is doing what I think it's doing. I'm not sure what I was doing there exactly. So here's some path syntax that we can look at. Big, bold, black line shapes on the right. Look how easy they are to draw. Like, of course, within SVG, I can have this very small view box. We're looking at a 10 by 10 grid. You can see the view box there. And I'm saying draw a straight, and then the very first upper left one, draw a straight line from 22 to 88. Fine. It does that. And I can say, draw it with a thick line and draw it with curves around it, all that stuff. You know, the next one over is, you know, draw two lines, you know, from here to here. So I've got a polygon kind of thing going on there. And then I'm playing with all the different curves in this example too, trying to wrap my head around them. And then in CSS as well. Oh, here's me. I should have played this video early. So I move it to 1-1. You'll see the line get a little longer, right? This is just I'm drawing connections to what's happening here. In the CSS, I'm saying, you know, big, thick line, make it nice rounded corners there. Don't end with, you know, jags. And then when you hover over each of them, change these values and animate them. So I'm just changing a couple of values on these things. And I got these really interactive, really fun, really nicely animated icon weirdnesses, I guess, through CSS alone. That's the only technology is a little bit of inline SVG sitting in the HTML and some CSS with some hovers attached. Really neat. So maybe they kind of look like little tiny pieces of string to me. And so I guess I put them on this page. We want to I kind of forget what we are talking about, I think.
Where was I? I forgot the point that I was making. I said if I was smart that I would save up for a piece of string and a rock to wind string around. Everybody wants a rock to wind a piece of string around.
Everybody wants a rock to wind a piece of string around, right? Everybody wants control over their SVG from CSS as well. We just looked at this one, inline SVG in CSS on the right. Yes, I can control that path data. What about polygons? You'd think for sure polygons would work. That polygon function works for all kinds of things in CSS, but I just don't have control over the points attribute in SVG, and there's no way to cut it in CSS. It doesn't work. So you'd think, what is it, just paths that happen to have that control? No, not really, because there's circles, there's ellipses, there's rectangles, all in SVG land, and all of the attributes on those elements, those SVG elements, are controllable in CSS, CX, CY, RX, all that stuff. So it's really just polygon that doesn't work, which is crazy. I mean, it seems bizarre to me, I should say, that polygon is one of the most supported things in the other properties, but just not so much right here. So there's this full support chart. I added D at the bottom there because D is just another example where that path function is supported, just like in offset path, but not so much in some of the places that we want it. So I made this list kind of for anybody who's like works at a browser or something that wants feedback. Here's the kind of list of things that seem to make sense that would kind of pull this party together. Shape outside should be able to use path. I should be able to define curves that I want my text to wrap around with. Shape outside would also be nice if I could wrap text around by pointing to a URL fragment. Right now it only takes the graphics. You know, it'd be nice to be able to point to an existing path on the page to wrap text around. It'd be nice to know what's up with path. And we didn't go deep into this, but we looked at the path syntax. Path syntax is unitless. All the values in SVG land are unitless, and path in CSS is unitless too, which is weird because I think it just assumes pixels. It just translates those unitless values into pixels, which is not how it works it's the only way it could work right now without like bringing ViewBox to CSS or changing that syntax to force it to have units. Anyway, like what's that path syntax gonna be like going forward in CSS? Because just keeping it unitless is too weird, I think. And that's what I mentioned in the fourth point as well. But Pat, there's talk about not having, like having the D attribute in CSS remain, but not wrapping it in the path function, because the path function is like, this is CSS's version of it. Whereas maybe just passing in a string would be the other way to do it anyway. And if we could figure out what's up with Polygon, that'd be nice too. Like, can we promote that points attribute into CSS in a way that makes sense? So kind of a list of 5 things there. But anyway, I've heard from folks involved literally with CSS, the language, that there is a desire to bring all this stuff together. I should mention that all the stuff we looked at tends to be like little design stuff that works great with progressive enhancement, meaning that if the text doesn't wrap around something perfectly, who cares? If I've animated a little dot around the screen, it doesn't animate. Tends to be the type of stuff where if it doesn't work in some older browser, big deal. But the browser support is generally pretty good for this stuff. Definitely not as explored as it could be. There's plenty of really fun stuff that you can do now with this stuff. Look around on CodePen. There's so many examples of really fun, fascinating stuff you can do there. Certainly hundreds, thousands of demos. For sure, those are the 4 properties we wanted to talk about. D, clip bath, shape outside, and whatever the 4th one was. My mind is going crazy. I think it's time for a beer. Thanks for listening. Take care. Okay, bye-bye.
There's only one thing that I know how to do well, and I've often been told that you only can do what you know how to do well, and that's be you. Be what you're like, be like yourself. And so I'm having a wonderful time, but I'd rather be whistling in the dark.